Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I know we have a jam-packed hour for you, so I'm only going to take about a minute to say welcome. This is CoLab, we aspire to be a quarterly webinar as a benefit to our members. Creative Ohio is the collective voice for the creative sector in Ohio. We represent the creative sector, the principal arts advocacy organization for the state. We do advocacy on behalf of the Ohio Arts Council and look for any and all opportunity for additional public investment and public awareness for arts and culture throughout the state. And it's my pleasure today to really hand things over to my friend Jill Moorhead, who is the founder of Big Trek Works, and essentially, in my mind, sort of straddles this line between media and the arts. Jill's definitely a creative. She'll probably tell you a little bit more about her work at Big Trek, but also a journalist. And so it has been um, her thought to convene a panel like this for a while. And we hope that the information today is of great benefit to you as both media and arts navigate some similar challenges in our collective landscape right now. So, Jill, take it away.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Just a quick note. Oh, Sarah, what are the rules?
Oh, good. Some housekeeping. Well, we're a pretty informal group today, so not a lot of rules. I think if you have a question for our panelists, if you would please put those in the chat at any point during our conversation today, and then we can field those. I would also ask you maybe to raise your hand or use the raised hand icon in our Q&A at the end, if that's easier for you than putting it in the chat. And also, you can tell we're using a meeting format, not a webinar format. So if you would just keep yourself muted. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So thank you all for coming. Again, I'm Jill Moorhead. I run Big Trek Works, which is a marketing and communications agency that does a lot of work in the arts. But I've also been a journalist for about 15 years. So as Sarah said, I do both sides, and this is a topic that's been really interesting to me as I've seen the challenges in the arts world and the challenges in the media world. And so, we're both dealing with shrinking resources, increased pressure to prove relevance, fractured audiences. And so today we'll explore how we can support one another, not just for coverage, but in service of storytelling, civic connection, and public trust. So I want to get started and we'll have each of the panelists introduce each other, and we'll start with Katie from Columbus Monthly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Smith. I'm the editor of Columbus Monthly, and I have been a journalist for 25 years. I am a Columbus native, and I only left for 5 years to go to Northeast Ohio and attend Kent State University, where I studied journalism, and I came immediately home to work covering the state house and state government for the Columbus Dispatch as an intern. And then I went through a series of positions working at basically all of the newspapers in town, um, ending up at Dispatch magazines in 2019. And since then, I've been the editor of Columbus CEO, a business magazine, the editor of Columbus Monthly, which is my current role. And now I'm also the general manager of the whole magazines group. We are part of Gannett, which is a giant national media company that's also the USA Today network. And we're a very small magazine group that is sort of an adjunct to the Columbus Dispatch Metro daily newspaper. We do collaborate with their staff. Um, Columbus Monthly has covered the arts historically since its founding 50 years ago. And 50 years ago this month, actually, the first issue came out. And we, relish the reputation that we've built for being a home for artists, especially writers, especially poets and writers. And so I think that is it. Hi, I'm Katie. Good to meet you.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Katie's also one of my editors. So we'll move to Claire.
Hi, my name is Claire Roth. I am the managing editor of the Ohio Newsroom, which is a conglomeration of public radio stations across the state. Actually, every news public radio station is part of our consortium. So we have a daily program called Today from the Ohio Newsroom, which airs on every single one of those stations. And that reaches about 700,000 listeners every week. And then we also have monthly traffic to our online stories of about 40,000. So our program is focused on filling the gaps that our individual stations can't cover. Our main newsrooms are in the three big C's and Dayton. So we focus a lot of our energy on what we call news deserts around the state. But something else we do is if something is very unique, very special, if we think that it's, so specific that it should be heard by everybody, we will occasionally elevate stories, even if they're from some of the more major cities, and bring those to our program. So we really look at unique productions and projects, and we especially love stories that have links to Ohio pride, that have links to just Ohioans doing special things, or that reflect the culture that we are living in. And I think that that's something that's been very essential to our success. 20% of our stories, every Friday, we have a lighter story of some form, and most of those end up being arts and culture stories. We see a lot of fabulous feedback on those stories. We think it's part of our duty to essentially bring people back to the news, and arts or stories are a wonderful way to do that. So that's the broad overview of how the Ohio Newsroom works.
Awesome. Thank you, Claire. And we'll do Brittany next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Mosley, the culture and arts reporter for Signal Akron. I've been in the role since Signal Akron started, which was in December 2023. I think that's right. And this is really my first time working from a newsroom and being able to build a position and also a newsroom from the ground up. So I am the sole culture and arts reporter full-time for Signal Akron. Signal Akron is a nonprofit newsroom, so similar to an NPR or a PBS model. And our goal is really just to be another news and culture source for Akron. Like a lot of cities, of course, Akron has struggled with keeping media. There have been cuts, of course, at the Akron Beacon Journal and things like that. So we're really just trying to make a stronger media landscape for the city. In terms of what I cover, really, the sky's the limit. I think the great thing about this role is I've been able to kind of decide what I think would work best as I go through it. I think getting feedback from the community has also been really helpful. But pretty much as long as there's an Akron connection or a Summit County connection, I'm interested in it, whether it's, event coverage, plays, musical art exhibits, just interesting people in the arts community. Really open to any idea you want to throw at me.
Great. Thank you, Brittany. And then finally, Michael.
Hi, everybody. Michael Gill from Can Journal. So I've been an arts journalist for about 30 years. I've worked as a freelancer for every kind of publication, as a full-timer as arts editor for Ohio's largest art weeklies, the Cleveland Free Times, and then the Cleveland Scene, before I started Can Journal. Can Journal started in 2012, started publishing in 2012, and it's distinct in that we are very much a niche publication. We're specifically focused on visual art in Northeast Ohio. So, so those are the pitches that we're interested in. Visual art from around Ohio, really, but Northeast Ohio mostly. And it's also important to note that Canton started as a bootstrap solution to the very problem that we're talking about, which is the dearth of media coverage of the arts. So in 2011, a group of galleries began talking amongst themselves about how to survive in difficult economic times, and kept coming to the subject of needing to get the word out about their programs. And I sort of came out of the arts journalism world in that context and started this nonprofit organization. which serves those needs. So we're partly a platform for organizations to tell their own stories about their own projects. And then we're also partly the familiar magazine with hired writers, overwhelmingly freelancers, who cover features, news reporting, interviews, and review exhibits focused on the visual arts. We also spend a good bit of energy on public funding. But those are our focus areas, and we're just generally interested in hearing from everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. So my first question, and I think you could just answer like based on, who's most excited to answer, but we'll go on this. So both arts organizations and media outlets are navigating fewer resources and higher expectations. What challenges are you seeing in media, and how are you thinking about your role in this shifting landscape? Should I call on someone? Katie, you look great.
I'm happy to talk about that because the biggest challenge, in my opinion, is paying the bills. And as it happens, the little nonprofit organization that I run has one full-time staffer, which is me. And I therefore have to oversee not only the editorial content and distribution circulation, managing all the people, but also making sure that there's enough money. And that is the challenge. It comes both for us, both from philanthropic sources, individual donors, foundations, also from advertising sales, and that is the challenge.
So thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I think that's true across the board. I don't think you'll find a media publication, nonprofit, for-profit, commercial that wouldn't tell you that same thing. The issue that we're really zeroed in on is where these publications close. So we see that, Columbus still has a number of publications. So do any of the major cities in the state, but places like Bucyrus, like Appalachian, Ohio, places where there's been population loss, lose news sources as well. And something that we are really dedicated to is covering those areas and really incorporating them into Ohio. And so we are a statewide organization, and that statewide nature, I think, allows us to go a lot farther because it means, one, we can boost these stories up to a statewide audience, to people everywhere. But then also it means that we are able to kind of knit people together. And that's why I think also art stories are fantastic. And one of the reasons we focus in on them, because they're not really regionally bound. So if something is fascinating, we did this floating circus that was going down the Ohio River. We did a story on that. That's something that is interesting to you, even if you live in far Northwest Ohio, even if you're nowhere near the Ohio River. And I think that's one of the places where art stories can really shine.
You, Claire.
I'll go next. I can definitely speak to the shrinking resources. Having been in legacy media for the majority or all of my career, we, once were large and mighty and now have dwindled to very few. A magazine's division in Columbus that was 25 staffers in 2022 is 5 today. And so that is just a microcosm of things that we've seen happen. We're not the only ones by far. Our daily newspapers once were giant. They had multiple, they might have even had arts desks. They had whole teams of reporters covering arts on the regular. And in Columbus, the Dispatch for a long time didn't even have any dedicated arts reporters. They have changed that. So that's some bright news on the horizon. They understand that even with fewer resources, that it's important to dedicate some of them to the arts. And so they have regular writers on that. We also, even though we're a magazine that has small resources, I think with a big footprint, we're still dedicating a good portion of our coverage to the arts, to letting readers know what events are coming up, to covering our region's major institutions, to covering independent artists and what life is like for them and the beautiful work that they're creating, getting the word out about them. I wish every day that we could do more. I think it's worth it to share with the group from working in very digital forward newsrooms that had to go through the pain of becoming digital forward. It in transitioning from a print environment to a digital environment, not only with news coverage, but with advertising, newsrooms had to start making decisions about what do we cover more frequently? What stories are we writing for the web? And once became able to see how much people were reading our stories, um, readership of stories began to drive our story selection. If readers don't read our stories, it's sad, but the truth is that arts coverage, especially of smaller organizations or individuals, just doesn't drive page views. It doesn't drive page views the way that sports does, or that stories about the culture wars, or stories about big development projects that are going to affect a lot of people. It's just sort of a baseline challenge that I think arts coverage faces, and makes it all the more worthy of protecting. And for us, one of the questions was, how do we decide what to cover at Columbus Monthly? And that is that I'm looking all the time for, where are the gaps? How do we fill in those gaps in the Columbus media landscape?
Thank you, Katie. Brittany?
I think, what everyone said is just so spot on to, things that we're thinking about at Signal Akron as well, and things that we're dealing with. I mean, one of the reasons Signal Akron started, as I mentioned, was to fill a gap in media coverage. And arts coverage was a big gap that needs filled in Akron. And, Akron is a smaller city compared to some of our cities like Cleveland or Columbus, Cincinnati, but the arts scene here is thriving. It is so varied and wonderful and supportive. And that was such a great thing for me to learn coming in. And they were really eager for someone to come in and, shine light on this community. I think the struggles that we have is, as a lot of people mentioned, I am also, the sole arts reporter for Signal Akron. I mean, we have some freelance reporters, which have been a big help, but there's always so much to cover. And, limited resources, of course, being one person, just being a small newsroom in general. There's always that. I think another thing we struggle with is we're really devoted to just trying to cover, just Akron as much as we can. But then, of course, you'll hear stories that sound great, maybe in Hudson or Stowe. So it's trying to balance how to add those in, as well as covering Akron, as fully as we can. And it's varied, 24 neighborhoods, I believe. So.
Awesome. A follow-up to that is, like, what is at stake when local arts coverage disappears? And I will, I'll just share, when Columbus Alive closed shop here in Columbus, realized we had a lot of coverage of events still. There were still media outlets saying events, but in my experience, there wasn't a lot of information about the stories behind the people. Like why the event, why this artist matters. And so if anyone wants to follow up on that.
I think,
Go ahead, Claire. Go ahead, Claire.
that hits the nail on the head. And that's where I think, that's honestly though, where I think, when speaking to Katie's point, a lot of public radio stations across the country have spent time in the past on, like, events calendars, for instance, but frankly, they see terrible click rates on those. They don't feel worth the time. What people end up engaging with more are those deeper stories. And those are also something that I think is really important, because, and I'm going to make this argument. I don't know how popular it'll be with this group, but when we do stories, we do them for people that won't go to the event. And we know that they can't just be a preview, because the vast majority of our audience, just numbers wise, when, especially when you're a statewide organization like we are, no, most of our people will not go to that event, but the engagement with the story itself, with the belief in arts, I think is huge. And so it makes me think of something I heard recently, where it's like, go clean up your local river. Is it going to solve the biggest environmental problems on earth? No, but when people see a beautiful local river, they believe the environment is worth investing in. And to me, that's what's lost when we lose arts coverage.
Excuse me. When we started Signal Akron, there's a few Akronites here in the audience, Nicole and Mac. I'm sure you'll remember that we got many comments about, oh, so are you like the Devil Strip? So the Devil Strip was a community paper that was in Akron. It covered the art scene for, I'm not sure how many years because I came to Akron as an outsider, but it was extremely popular. It covered the art scene, you know, widely and well, and people loved it. So that told me right away that people are eager for arts coverage in this city and they feel like it's missing. And I just, you know, this is kind of a small thing, but when we were, you know, starting Signal, we made a conscious decision, just my reporter name, to put it culture and arts reporter, like to put culture first, which seems like a small thing. But we wanted to make very clear like what our priorities are and that we view the arts and entertainment as a very important part of, you know, the city of Akron and how it operates. I mean, yes, people, of course, care about their school board, they care about policing, they care about, you know, streets resurfacing and politics and all of these things. But I think when you get to the soul of a city and the heart of it, the arts and the culture and where people find joy just plays a very large part in that. And I think that that's really been my experience as well with Signal. So.
If you think about arts as an economic development driver, you know, that's something that I've been really happy to see more, you know, increasingly be embraced here in the Central Ohio region. For a long time, arts was relegated just to the Alive, right? We would write stories, and then there would be this awesome weekly newspaper that, which is gone now, like so many of them, like almost all of them is gone now. They would write about what was going on in the arts, and now we see regional leaders recognizing that fact, investing in art, creating giant redevelopment projects centered around art. It's pretty amazing, and I think is the you know, if there's a city guide that is to be written about Columbus. They always want to include art now. And I can't say that that was the truth 15, even 10 years ago. It's great to see that consciousness changing. And I hope that bodes well for, even if it's not traditional media coverage of the arts, people are talking about it on our tourism bureau websites, on our economic development websites, and other places that are part of, I guess I'll just say, the general online conversation.
Katie, I totally agree. And I think about, you know, Creative Ohio is hosting this, and advocacy is the goal of Creative Ohio. And I think just to all of you folks out here, like, you know, can you send pitches that involve like the economic impact of the work that you're doing? Because then maybe you're not just relegated to art, but also to news and to telling a bigger story about the value. Michael?
Yeah, I think when arts coverage is lost, the arts sector loses its place at the public table. It's in part just a matter of visibility. You know, when you're in public discussion, when there's either printed or broadcast or online stories about you, you're showing up in public, and that matters exactly for the role of art in society, whether it's economic development or community building. And I would say that for the art sector, for the community itself, if you lose arts coverage, you kind of lose touch with what's going on in the community. You know, apart from the crime and the celebrities and the things that do get clicks, more clicks, you know, coverage of what artists are doing and especially doing in the community is what makes the community. I mean, those things are what makes the community, and arts coverage shows that to people.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. So we'll move on to the next question. Something that I'm sure all of our organizations want to know is what makes a good pitch? So what makes a pitch stand out to you? What do you wish arts organizations did more or less of when reaching out? And Claire, you're moving a lot, so we'll start with you.
I have an answer I know people are not going to like, which is tailor your pitches. Look at the arts coverage that the organization you are pitching to has done and pitch them along the same lines. It is so easy to ignore a press release that was obviously sent out to everybody. It is much harder to ignore something that said, I noticed that you did something about Appalachian sculpture last year. I have a follow-up that would make sense with that. And that's like it's partially an ego thing, I am sure, but partially it is knowing that you took the time and that that pitch might actually fit for us. The other thing I will say is that with annual events, an annual event every year is very hard to cover because it's not new. Like we have the word new is right in our name, right? So try to focus on what is new about that event. Is it drawing record crowds? Is there a different angle to it? Whatever it might be, think about that level, because there's a particular organization that I'm not going to call out because they could be here. I don't think they are, that sends just endless press releases, and all of it is just classic tourist stuff. News never wants to feel like it's PR for you. And so I think that that's another thing that's important. Larger context too with your pitches. How does what your particular event doing, how does it fit into the landscape of Ohio? How does it fit into larger national trends? That's another thing that I think can make a lot of pitches better, is when you acknowledge what it might be speaking to beyond just the event itself, and then characters. We really love, as we talked about, that kind of deeper coverage that's not just this event is happening, but rather like, here's a person who, you know, if they're an immigrant, if they've lived in Ohio for all their life, but they're trying something new, whatever it might be, if there's texture there with the person themselves, there will be more to cover. And that gets to, you know, our goals of regional culture and Ohio pride. So those are the three big things I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you, Claire. Brittany?
Yeah, I think, you know, all of those things that Claire said, of course. And I think also, if it's kind of I love kind of the off the beaten path or interesting or, you know, kind of kooky stories, you know, things that I might not know about unless someone was, you know, reaching out. And, you know, and it is hard to kind of, I think, figure out what does hit, especially as a new organization. You know, there are definitely times when I have written a story and think this is going to be like, people are going to love this, and it doesn't, you know what I mean? So we're still, I definitely think, trying to find that balance. But I think for me, you know, some of the best pitches I've gotten have just like immediately grabbed me. I'm thinking, you know, recently I got a pitch about a project at a local theater company, and they were working on digitizing 90 years of their paper ephemera. And which is just immediately like, wait, what? You're 90 years old, you can do that? Things like that. You know, I got a pitch recently for a local horror museum, and immediately it was like, there's a horror museum in Akron. So I think things like that just kind of grab you and make me think, I didn't know about that, so maybe my readers don't know about that. That always helps. So
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, I would say the similar to tailoring your pitches, I would say know your audience when you're pitching. And so Can Journal, speaking for ourselves, we're interested in visual art stories, especially about Northeast Ohio. And so, you know, don't send us an orchestra story. Yeah, just know those things. And we're also interested in connections, in the reasons that distinguish something, if you want to help with those. But the real key is visual art, Northeast Ohio.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. And Katie.
I feel like so much of the time for our partners and friends in communications and marketing, pitching is this like assignment that you can pass or fail. And they put so much energy into it, and I so much appreciate that. But I know, at least for me, like what I want is relationships. Come and get to know me. Ask me out for lunch. Let's go out for coffee. Let me talk to you. Invite me to your events. Let me be a fly on the wall at your meetings. All of us in the news, like artists, are intensely curious, and we're always thinking of new ideas and noticing new ideas. We notice the world around us in an intense way. And so you don't have to, just like I can't paint a painting, I don't expect my PR and Marcom friends to be great at coming up with news stories. I can do that. Just invite me to your party.
Awesome. Katie, I'll invite you to my next party. You know, I'll just say, as a freelancer, I get those generic big blasts from PR companies. And the thing that there's one where they're like, "Hi, Kristen," And again, my name is Jill. So like, if you're going to work with a PR firm, in the very least, like make sure you have the name right. But I ignore every single one. And when I pitch stories to my editors, you know, I'm looking in the neighborhood, I'm looking for ways to contribute larger conversations. And I know that, you know, with Columbus Monthly and another and Ohio Cooperative Living, they have the space for the features to really get deeper than this event is happening. And so that's just a side note. And I would say, you know, you can pitch not only to the publications, but I think everyone here said that they use freelancers, or all of the writing folks do. And so if you know freelance writers, I'd pitch to them as well. I'd love to hear from all of you on an example of a recent standout pitch. And Katie, we'll start with you.
Oh, geez. A recent standout pitch. Well, this is so exclusive news. To go back to Claire's point about, you know, pitching, tailoring your pitches. We also love, you know, our fortunes in the news will rise and fall with our ability to deliver stories that you can't find anywhere else. Exclusive news, enterprise. So if you have a big story, or if you have a beautiful in-depth story, particularly for Columbus Monthly, which is our specialty, come and talk to me. You might not have might not have it buttoned up perfectly, but try to pitch it. So I guess my answer to recent pitch would be when a group of art galleries came to me and said, we're leaving a very prominent neighborhood in Columbus for another neighborhood that is up and coming. We're leaving together at the same time. This move is also going to be part of a massive redevelopment project, the details of which have not been released. And we will give you all of this only to you because I happen to be able to deliver that story on 3 different platforms, right? Columbus Monthly, Columbus CEO, and the Columbus Dispatch. So I was able to write and deliver a giant 4,000 word package on these art galleries moving, on a new restaurant being opened by one of our city's top chefs that no one else had reported on yet, and also on the beautiful personal stories, really, of these gallerists and what caused them to make this big, they're taking this huge risk to move. So that was definitely the best pitch I've gotten in recent times.
Thanks, Katie. Michael.
For a long time, listening to artists, Can has been interested in making connections outside the immediate region, because that's what artists are trying to do. And when someone hatches a plan to do that in a significant way, we're interested. And so the pitch came from an organization called Artists Archives of the Western Reserve, which, following up on conversations between friends, honestly, in Buffalo, they created a show that would involve artists of both regions, curators of both regions, and would start in Cleveland at the Artists Archives, and then after it's run there, travel to Buffalo. And so that was doing something that we've followed or been interested in for a very long time, and that was a really no-brainer of a story for us to do. So that was a good pitch. Pay attention to what we're doing.
Yeah, awesome. Brittany.
I think some of the best pitches have just come from people who I've met, maybe working on other stories, or I've met in the community, or also just colleagues connecting me. I mentioned the horror museum. That was through another source. I interviewed for something else. He just happened to know about it. He connected us. Another really good recent pitch was a colleague connected me to a local organization here called the Akron Sneaker Academy. It's a group that works with youth and uses sneaker culture and fashion to, explore STEM fields and STEM projects. So the coworker, said, "Hey, I think you guys should connect." He introduced us. Dominic of the Sneaker Academy immediately reached out, told me a bit about his organization, kept it brief, but like enticing, which is always great. Love a brief email. And just had a strong, I think, intro and a strong, he knew why his organization was interesting and important, and it came across very quickly in that email. I think that story did really well. People loved it. They found it interesting and new. He was launching a summer camp, and it was, I think immediately it signed up and was sold out. So that was just one of those, like, someone knows someone. They made an effort to send, a quick introduction email, and that person acted, quickly and moved. So I think those are just some of those more maybe just casual, just maybe connecting a person and saying, I don't know what will happen, but I wanted to introduce you guys. Oftentimes those will lead to stories, I think.
Thank you. And Claire?
Mine is a bit of a cheat because it was from a reporter who pitched it to me. One of my station reporters suggested it, but it was about barber shop quartets across the state. And there had been a training session for like Ohio barbershop quartets. But what I loved about it is, one, it was sound rich. So as you're thinking about public radio, and I want to say what I am sharing, while it applies for your local public radio stations as well. So almost all of you have every single person here has a public radio station whose signal reaches you. So I really encourage you to reach out locally in addition to reaching out to me, but sound rich pieces are beautiful. And so of course, a barbershop quartet, beautifully sound rich. So that was one thing that really worked in its favor. It had people from all over Ohio. That also worked in its favor. It turns out that in multiple categories, Ohioans have won barbershop quartets. So that is another thing in its favor, where it's got national significance. So those are a few of the things that made it just like, oh, that's an instant yes from me. I can't wait to hear this on air.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. I think one thing both Katie and Claire touched on a little bit was the like 3 makes a trend. So when Katie talked about those galleries, it's not just your gallery moving. There were multiple galleries. And so when I am in my PR hat, I'm looking for other things. So if I'm promoting my grocery store that I have to promote, but also something's going on in the food scene or whatnot with 2 other places, I could pitch that bigger story. But then when I'm a freelancer pitching to editors, I'm also looking for themes. And I think that's really valuable for Creative Ohio members. You guys know each other. You could say, we've noticed this. Is this happening in your organization as well? And then that becomes a bigger, broader story. So we will move to what's missing and what's possible. So how can arts organizations better align their pitches with the business priorities of your publication? Whether that's audience growth, engagement, or revenue?
I can start this one. I think in terms of, I'm looking at this question as kind of similar to the previous one, as what does well, because I think when you have a story that does well, that of course leads to audience growth. I can say for Akron specifically, although I think it would probably work for a lot of these publications, things that are very Akron centric or Akron history focused always do well. And this was similar, I think, when I was working in Columbus with Katie at Columbus Monthly. Things that are very like Columbus focused, like those kind of, whether it's the Buckeyes or Ohio State or, Johnny, what is that salad? Or that pasta dish? Katie,
Johnny Marzetti.
Thank
Johnny
you. Yes,
Marzetti.
Johnny Marzetti. Yeah. So in Akron, things like whether it's the Zips or it's Quaker Square or Goodyear or the Blimp, or Swenson's, these very kind of like Akron things. And again, all cities have those. Those always do well. I think that's one thing to keep in mind. So if there's a kind of a fun, I think, local city or history focus, that always does well. But I think in terms of, aligning with our priorities, as I mentioned, a big priority of Signal is to make sure that we're covering all of Akron's neighborhoods to the best of our ability, which is, of course, difficult to do when you have a small staff and there's so many neighborhoods. I think with arts and culture, especially, a lot of things tend to be concentrated in the downtown core. Again, I think that's probably similar to many cities across Ohio and the country. So I think anytime there's stories that take me out of downtown or out of the quote unquote like city, if it's getting into neighborhoods that we might not be covering as much, those are always wonderful and things we want to hear about because we really want to make sure that we're reaching those audiences as well. So I think those, are big for us, kind of anything local history related or very Akronite, and then also getting us outside of, I think, the downtown core will really help not only share a wider range of like arts coverage, but hopefully broaden our coverage and broaden our engagement and get in more audience members. So
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany.
Yeah, I've touched on this for us before too, but we are really looking for either stories that connect the state. So yesterday, I'm part of the Advocacy Leadership Institute of Creative Ohio, and I was talking with someone from the Shakespeare Company, and she said, "Oh, well, there's someone from Cleveland, the playwrights from Cleveland, and someone else is for like the composers from Toledo, and this is happening in Cincinnati." And I'm like, "Oh, we love those sorts of stories." So trend stories that can connect different dots are really up our alley. And then stories from what we call like underrepresented points of view and demographics. And so that is, that can be people of color, because historically the mainstream media has done a pretty terrible job of covering those communities, but it can also mean like very rural areas, because those are underrepresented as well. And so thinking about how we can fill those gaps, as Brittany was saying, I think that that's universal. It just depends on, the gaps depend on the publication. And those are our gaps, for instance.
Thank you, Claire. Michael?
Yeah, I would say, pitch us and help us tell stories that address the challenges and interests and sometimes problems that we all face. So those include, regional connections and economic challenges and advocacy issues like public funding. Those things that are common and support and relate to the sector as a whole, whether they're funding or audience or neglected stories. Certainly marginalized communities have been an important subject for us. So yeah, those things.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. And Katie?
I would say I'll just return to the things that I said previously, but that's, pitching us stories that you can't find anywhere else. So tailoring the pitches. And then also, I think, I think there's a place for events in this conversation because audience growth and engagement for some of our organizations have been really boosted by events. And so doing events together is one way. When you're thinking of events, is there a role for your local media partner? Worth a thought.
Yeah, so are you talking about being a media sponsor for an event?
Being a media sponsor or even being a co-host in some way.
Fantastic.
And that, I just want to say, I absolutely agree with that. And that speaks to Katie's point earlier that I really appreciated, which was that concept of relationships. And obviously it's very hard to do that with a bunch of different media organizations, but to form those relationships and to just ask the question of, is there a way that we might be able to do more together, I think is such a good one. And then I put this in the chat, but I wanted to reiterate Brittany's point from earlier about joy-focused stories. I think uplifting stories are another gap that almost every single media publication has right now. And so as we build our portfolios, we want to do stories that are hard hitting news, but then we need these leavening agents on the other side to balance it. And that's where art stories can be really a nice fit.
Thank you. So I attended a panel maybe a couple years ago that was for the Columbus Arts Marketing Association. And some of the folks, Katie mentioned this, was, the overlords are looking at clicks, and I'm wondering if there's anything we can do as a collective group of creatives running creative organizations to get more clicks. Will that make a difference in you getting another dollar for a freelancer?
I would say share the stories that are written about you or told about you. So if you become the subject of a public radio story or a story in Can Journal or any such thing, probably that's a credit to your organization. And you almost certainly have your own contact list, your own newsletter or whatever. Share those links.
Awesome, great. Okay, I think we're gonna move to Q&A. So guess you can type a question in the chat or just unmute and I don't think we've got one person who could raise their hand, but okay, great. We have one from Mark. So what advice do you have for building relationships with media outlets when it's a revolving door of editors and reporters combined with shrinking newsrooms? Goes on, we have one daily paper in Hamilton, but as part of the Cox chain in the shadow of the larger Dayton Daily News, it's less local than it's ever been, and all of our TV is focused on Cincy. So we really struggle to attract 25 miles north. That's a great question.
Mark, I so empathize with what you're saying as someone who, not only lives in a smaller city that can be, overshadowed by Cleveland, but as someone who grew up in Springfield, Ohio, which had a great local paper and, is also now, of course, more Dayton Daily News. And so I empathize with that. Yeah, that's hard. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it helps to remember that, probably I would say everyone in this career of journalism, we're here for a reason, and we care about what we're doing and what we're writing and where we're living. So while I think it can be hard with turnover, I think just reaching out to people, maybe asking if there's time to just like, grab a coffee or like talk about, even approaching them at like events, I think can be a big thing. That's how I've met a lot of people, just being out in the community myself, and people have come up to me and chatted with me. Um, and then I think kind of going back to what we've also said about, targeting your stories, of course, and making sure that they, are kind of, that they're targeted to who you're pitching it to, and that there is kind of a unique or interesting focus to it. But I know I think I'm rambling, but I really do sympathize with that. And I think it's hard. I think it's just, yeah, trying to maybe make some more of those connections and find ways to meet reporters maybe where they're at. But someone else please jump in, because I think I'm rambling.
No, I think it's a tough question. I don't think there's like a clean, clear, easy answer, which is sad, but also like the case in so much of media. One, I'd say please pitch to us, because we love covering those sorts of areas. So that's one kind of easy thing to say. And I think that like the building of the relationships can be as simple in this case as sending an email when the new person starts and saying, hi, I wanted to introduce myself. If you have a chance to get a coffee or a virtual coffee, if you have 10 minutes so I can understand what you want from pitches. And then even if it's that simple, that doesn't seem like a terribly large investment of time. So even if that person only stays for a year, you know that how that person wants those pitches. Because even with the 5 of us, we have different answers to these questions, right? So if you connect to the new person, the new editor, whatever, and you have 10 minutes of their time to hear what pitches are you interested in and what should I not bother with, that'll save you a lot longer time in the interim of however long they are there, of you wasting, time sending them stuff that they're never, ever, ever going to act on.
Okay. I'll just speak up as a freelancer. I would say keep in touch with the people who have written about you before. So again, a lot of people use freelancers. There's a publication in Columbus that has like they have 4 editors a year. Like I can't, in my PR lens, I don't even pitch to them, because like I don't, I just like, who's going to be in charge of it next month? Who knows? But in my, 15 years of writing, I have had several editors through Columbus Monthly. Katie is never leaving Columbus Monthly, and she'll always be there, but I've been there the whole time. And so, and a lot of people who started off full staff for publications are now freelancing. So keeping in touch with those freelancers, and if they have a good story and they can't cover it in their publication, they can send it to someone else. Michael, Katie? Michael, you're muted. Or your sound's just not working.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, I would second that. To reach out, do the work, invite people to coffee. It's not the coffee they want. It's really the checking in and the conversation. And also I would say when those editors and writers move on, keep the relationships up because they probably go somewhere.
That's great. Katie.
I mean, it seems simple, but I think it's difficult. When a new reporter starts on the beat at the local paper, reach out to them, just like Claire said. It does make it worth it, even if it's 1 half-hour coffee, even if it's a 20-minute quick Zoom call where you get your face in front of their face and you build that relationship. It helps them to feel like they're relevant. It helps them to feel like the work that they're doing matters, that you care about them, that they're not just, there to deliver on your aims, but also that their publication's important to the community. And for sure, once a writer or journalist, always one. Follow the people, can maintain the relationships. We all go somewhere for sure. And I know I have lots of times.
I just wanted to add because I feel like I was just a rambling mess. Remembered this when Claire mentioned the Ohio newsroom. Even though you're based in Hamilton County and you're kind of competing with Cincinnati publications, I think it's also important to remember that there are publications like Ohio Magazine or maybe publications like Columbus Monthly that will sometimes do like weekend driving trips and, to other parts of Ohio. Same with, I think, Cleveland Magazine. So while those aren't your core audience or your core media, I think it's important to remember that there are these other maybe statewide publications or websites that often are looking for local stories about certain areas in the state. Also things like tourism, like I know the Columbus Tourism Board uses a lot of freelance journalists. They have a pretty good web presence with uh, stories around Columbus. I'm sure there's something similar for Hamilton and for around Cincinnati. So I think maybe finding those maybe is a way to kind of get your news out there to people that maybe aren't a daily reader or someone that lives in your county, but are still wanting to know what's going on in their state for interesting things to do. So,
And I'll add alumni magazines to that. Ask your main people, where'd you go? If they went to Oberlin, if they went to Denison or KSU or Ohio State, all 4 of those have pretty robust alumni magazines, and they love those sorts of stories.
And freelancers love alumni magazines because they pay a lot. So a quick note to what Brittany said. I write for a publication called Ohio Cooperative Living. It's with the electrical cooperatives. It has 300,000 readers. And these are people who read like 2,000 word stories from start to finish. So finding those cooperatives and finding some of those technical stuff as well. That's great. It looks like we have another question. Oh, Katie says great publication. Ohio Cooperative Living or alumni magazines, or both, all of them. Max says, I agree with Claire's point on the importance of stories to inspire. What kind of content can we share to support these efforts? What is the best medium we can use to support this?
I think that your organizations are doing it, or at least in my experience of arts organizations in Ohio, you're doing it. One of the best things, we are a mission-driven organization, which we're very lucky to be, and we get to stand on the shoulders of all of these various public media stations who have been doing this for years. I think that often arts organizations are also mission-driven, and it's one of the reasons why there is so much overlap and there are so many like chances for synergy, to use a gross business jargon word, but like you are probably seeking out specific artists to do certain things to fill certain holes. Use those angles when you pitch it to us. So if someone is putting on Guys and Dolls for the 1500th time, like that's not going to be interesting. But if you are seeking out a first-time Ohio playwright who is writing about like their family's journey coming to America, or how their ancestors went back, or whatever, you know the angles because you sought out those creators for that reason. Use that to pitch it to us and help us understand the importance of that as you present it. And I think another thing too, though, is like I'm doing that and that's very identity based, right? But a lot of times these people are also taking part in more traditional forms of art. Those are reasons to like raise it up as well. So I think that it's kind of doing both of those angles. But if there's a reason that your organization is supporting it, I'm sure there's a publication who is passionate about amplifying that kind of story as well. And so it's about finding that match.
Thank you, Claire. Just a few thoughts. When you do have those coffees with the reporters, couple things. Don't just pitch your own stories. Talk to them about other cool stuff going on in the community. You're not going to feel like a PR machine just to them. Show up with a year's worth of what your priorities are. So, you know, when I ran marketing at CCAD, we would go to Experience Columbus and be like, this is what we're doing for the year, so that they could take a look. But also ask if there's an editorial calendar. Like, you know, I know that the monthly magazines do have like a plan, like, you know, certain topics are going to be covered on certain months, and then you can identify your pitches based on what you know they're going to be planning for. Any other like last minute questions from anyone?
Bill, I have one from the audience. The importance of relationships have been brought up a couple of times. I wonder if our panelists can expand on, you know, a relationship goes two ways, sort of what is the responsibility of the reporter in that relationship? And I say that thinking about perhaps artists or organizations who are maybe fearful about being misunderstood or misrepresented, you know, potentially exploited or had a bad experience in the past. And so if you could just expand on sort of creating that relationship of trust with organizations and artists.
I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I'm scared to be the first person to jump in. I will say we take that really seriously, and it's something that we can always be doing better on. And I understand the hesitance because it feels like there's a power imbalance with the media because we're the gatekeepers. I will say, at least if you pitch to me, if you pitch to my reporters, or if you're talking to us, we want to hear that feedback. We are covering so many different communities in the state that it is critical for people to tell us not just when we're going wrong, but the concerns up front. And then we can talk about the baseline, you know, the parameters for the story, for instance. We have had stories, we had a recent one actually, that I'll use as an example. I'll try to be quick because I know that we're at 1 o'clock, but basically there was a community that was doing it was a Cinco de Mayo celebration. And when they originally pitched it to us, they said there was a KKK rally in this area 20 years ago, and now we are doing a Cinco de Mayo parade, hurrah. And we're like, oh, that's a wonderful angle, great. And we went out to report it. And when we talked to the woman who was Latina, she said, I don't want that covered. And she like completely shut down. And we had to make the call of what is the right thing to do in this scenario. This was the angle that we originally were excited about, but we found another angle because our respect for the community was important. And it's not that you can dictate what publications do, but we knew, especially because we were both white in this particular scenario, it's about race, but there's of course 1,000 different kind of vectors of this. That we wanted to build that relationship. And we also wanted this person in some ways to be in charge of the narrative that they were giving. And they didn't want it to be in the shadow of white supremacy. And we could understand that. And so I think that a lot of it comes down to open dialogue. And I know that that can be scary, but I think that if you start to build the relationship, that's part of trust. And that is also somewhat something that gets built in the meantime, but it takes that honesty. And we are doing as we do more engagement journalism, and as we work to be in these areas and demographics that have been historically either undercovered or mistreated, by mainstream media. We are really trying to do that kind of respectful thing of like showing up recorders off for our first meeting, things like that. So I guess it comes down to honesty and openness. And I understand that that can be really vulnerable, but I think you can probably tell from the people here, we're open to it. We're journalists because we want to listen.
I think that's such a great point. And we, you know, this whole business is built on trust, the whole news business. And the people who are in it do care, and they they want to develop trusting relationships with sources and do the right thing. So I think it's a good way to approach it, that assuming that up front, assuming that we have good intentions, assuming that we want to build a relationship and that we want to get it right. We desperately want to get it right. So if something happens and you're in the course of your activities with news organizations that you don't like, call it out. And if the reporter presents a roadblock to you, contact their boss, because people in news organizations don't want to get it wrong, and they want to do things in a way that does engender trust.
Thank you, Katie. And I'll just throw in from my PR and marketing hat. Super easy to get a fact changed on a website if something is wrong. But don't, facts are great, but if like you're looking at quotes and stuff like that, that's gonna sit with that writer. Later they might be able to make the change, but they might, you want to keep that relationship open. Facts, go ahead and say, oops, this is wrong. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to our panelists. Really appreciate having you and getting to see all your faces today. We will send this short little slideshow to all of the speakers, or to everyone who attended today. And there'll also be a survey so you can tell us how you thought it went. And I think that's it. And if there's any other questions, you can go ahead and email these folks directly, or email myself or Sarah. And again, thank you for spending Friday afternoon with us. Take care.
And thank you, Jill, for the idea and for facilitating. We'll also have a recording of this available on Creative Ohio's YouTube. So I know many people will catch up afterwards on the recording. Thanks to all of our panelists. Lots of thoughtful comments. Appreciate you all.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.